I'd like to thank Aditya and the Beams organization for reaching out to me and inviting me to do this talk. I did this talk last year and I had a really good time doing it, and I'm glad to be back. So let's get started. So just a couple disclaimers before we get into the meat of the topic. I graduated from Electrical and Biomedical a long time back, 7 years ago. It's going on to 8 years. So some of my information on job markets and admission requirements for medical school may be outdated. So I encourage you, if you are really interested, please go online, look up the information, and do your research. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. I have become jaded. That's just a joke. It's a poor joke, but my point is that everyone's experiences shape who they are, and I'm no different. And anything I say is not by any means fact. I mean, I do say some facts, but a lot of this talk is about my own experiences. So please take that into context when you're coming up with your own plan and your own career path. The third point is I'm not here to give you hope, and I'm not here to take it away. I'm not here to be that glimmer of hope or that beacon of whatever you want to call it. I'm just here to get my experiences, kind of share my story with you guys. And I'm also not here to take any hope away. I'm here to kind of give you alternative path, alternative career path through biomedical engineering. And I also love to answer questions and have discussions, and this may lead to tangents, so if I'm kind of going on a rant or getting off topic, please kind of redirect me, and I'll be happy to try to keep this as short as possible, and then we can answer your questions. So who is this guy? Who's this guy giving you this talk? So I'm actually an alumni from the Electrical and Biomedical Engineering program here at McMaster. I graduated in 2009. I did 4 years. I didn't do any co-op, so I started in 2005. And after that, so I graduated in June, and from June of 2009 to about February, March of 2010, I didn't do any work or anything like that. I was mostly volunteering, doing a bit of research volunteering as well, and looking for a job. And I happened to find a work placement as a research engineer, or quote-unquote research engineer, at the Focus Ultrasound Laboratory at Sunnybrook Health Sciences under their research institute. And then that was from March 2010 to 2011. And then after that I switched roles. I went to the Sick Kids Research Institute, and it was in a different area of research. It was in functional brain imaging, again as a staff research analyst. I don't know what these titles mean, they're just titles, it doesn't really mean anything. But that was from March 2011 to August of 2012. And then I actually got into medical school that year in August of 2012, and I graduated from the University of Toronto just this past spring in 2016, and now I'm a PGY1, or a first-year resident in the internal medicine program, also at the University of Toronto. So that's kind of a summary of my path. And I wanted to start off this talk kind of going through engineering work life and my experiences with engineering. The caveat is I didn't work in industry. I worked in research-related, well, not industry, but research-related environments. So this obviously will vary from person to person. And most of the work I did was in research-related fields. So the first job I did, I mentioned I was at Sunnybrook. It was in the Focus Ultrasound Laboratory. And it was really hardware-based projects that I did. I was involved in designing hardware systems. So what we did was, the goal of the lab was to make focus ultrasound technology to kind of fight tumors. So basically, when you make a focus ultrasound beam, it can heat up tissue, and that heating up can cause death of the tissue. And the whole point was to use the focus ultrasound to heat up tumors and kill tumors that way. So I was involved in designing and implementing the hardware behind running their systems, troubleshooting them, and making sure they got manufactured and so forth. My second job was in my second research position was in functional brain imaging, so it was a completely different environment. And here we had children that would come in for research projects, and the studies were looking at basically brain functioning during certain tasks. And my job specifically was, we got a lot of data from the MEG scanner. So an MEG scanner is really like an EEG, except it uses magnetic fields as opposed to electrical fields. And what I did with the data, we got this tons and tons of data from all the sensors, and we would run various software packages and design various software tools to analyze that data to understand brain function in children better. So that was kind of my engineering, quote-unquote engineering work experience. So why medicine? I get this question a lot, especially from people not in engineering, and sometimes from people in engineering. they asked me, why did you make the switch? And I got this question asked to me at both my medical school interview and also my residency interview. Like, why did you, all of a sudden you have all these engineering related experiences, and why did you make the switch to medicine? And so this really is the pros of medicine. This slide is kind of why I made the switch, or some of the reasons. And one of the reasons is actually a lot of ways medicine is very similar to engineering. It's very analytical, a lot of problem solving based, detail oriented, can be very collaborative, which engineering is also, especially in the workforce. And in other ways, medicine is completely different. Obviously, the material and the theory is very different, but also the type of work you do in medicine is very different. You're interacting with people more, you're helping others out, you have that more face-to-face interaction with patients, and so that's very different from engineering, which I didn't find I got much out of my engineering work experience. I also found in medicine that I applied what I learned. A lot of times in engineering, how many of you are in, I just want to get a gauge of the year, so how many people are in fourth year here? Anyone in fourth year? A few people in fourth year, and who's in third year? Okay, and second year? Okay, so most of you are in second year. So I found, and I was just talking to Didi about this, I found second year the hardest year. I don't know if, how other people found it, but I found it's a very heavy on, and just engineering in general, very heavy on theory, very heavy in math, physics, and the engineering sciences and so forth. And I never in my work experience, other than programming, I never applied any of the things I actually learned in class in the work field. And that's in the research environment. And usually in research, you apply more of what you learn, I guess, in school, in the research environment, whereas in the industry, you actually don't use anything you learn. Obviously programming you learn and you apply, but other than that, not really. And I found in medicine it was the exact opposite. I'm learning things in class that I then apply when I go onto my rotations and rotations. I actually apply a lot of that classroom or theoretical knowledge to practice, and it's really, and I found that very satisfying. I found that I'm actually learning something that's useful and I can apply it to everyday work. And the other caveat, and this is a bit of a caveat statement, is it can be very flexible and diverse. And the caveat to that is once you're staff. And what I mean by staff is, and I'll get to this later on, it's a very long training process, but when you're finally done and licensed, you're called a quote-unquote staff. And at that point, you can really shape your practice the way you want, and it can be very flexible and diverse in that way. Whereas early on in the training in medicine, it's not as flexible, and I'll get to that in a second. Which is actually this next slide. So the drawbacks, quirks, and cons of medicine. So when I was at your stage, I never kind of considered any of these things. I kind of I want to do medicine, I really want to do medicine, I really hope I get into medicine. It was kind of that constant, drive or motivation, but I never kind of took any of these things into account. And I kind of face these things now and afterwards as I finished medical school. So the first point is it's a very long training program. You have to do at least 3 years of undergrad. Most people obviously do 4 years. And then medical school is 3 or 4 years. Every school in Canada is 4 years. Every school in the state is 4 years. There's only 2 schools in Canada that aren't 4 years. It's Mac and Calgary, and they're both 3 years. And then residency training, which is after you graduate from medical school, can be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And the only residency training program that's 2 years is family medicine. So if you want to be a family doctor, that's great, you do 2 years. But if you want to do anything else, any specialty, surgery, medicine, anything, you have to do at least 5 years of training. And some people even subspecialize further, which could be anywhere from 1 to 3 years of additional training on top of all that. So bare minimum, you're looking at 10 years of training after high school, obviously. And that's if you get in right away. So if you get in right away, you get 10 years, that sounds not so big, it's a big deal. But I didn't get in right away. I got in after 3 years of trying, after graduating from university. So that adds 3 years, so it's 13 years for me. But I'm doing a specialty program, so I have another 4 or 5 years until I finish. And I'm thinking of maybe subspecializing, so that's another 1 or 2 years. So it's a really long process. Some people decide to do masters and PhDs because they want to do more research work in medicine. So that's another 4 or 5 years on top of that. So it's a very long training process. And the training's not easy, especially during residency. And I made this slide last year not knowing how hard residency is because I hadn't experienced it. I was giving the medical school or medical student perspective, but now I'm actually a resident and done 3 months. And again, I'm very early on in my training, but it's hard. It's not easy. Long hours. You face a lot of difficult encounters, both emotionally, mentally. So it can be very draining. And I mentioned the long hours and on-call days. So really what on-call means is I have to be available. You work 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, whatever your normal hours are, and then from 5 p.m. all the way until the next morning, usually anywhere between 8 and 10 a.m., I have to be available to either see patients or deal with ward issues, and depending again what service I'm covering on call. So that can be they can be very, very stressful times on call. Patients can be very sick, and usually when you're in residency, you do have backup. There are people available to help you out, but usually you're the first point of contact. So it can be very stressful in that sense. And the fourth point is, and you may be able to relate to this better than me, is you can get in a lot of debt. I remember last year I asked how much tuition was, and I was shocked. I think it's like $14,000-$15,000 a year now, around that range. Is that correct? Am I right? Okay. So when I went to Mac in 2005 to 2009, it was $7,000. So it's actually medical school training. Most of the tuitions are about the same from across the board in Ontario, and I think it's around. I think UofT is now $24,000 a year. Most schools are around that range, from anywhere from 20 to 25,000. If you're looking at schools in the States or in the U.S., you're looking at upwards to $50,000 a year. And then obviously international is even more expensive. So that you can get in a lot of debt. So imagine you have all this debt from undergrad that you have, like 15,000 times 4 is like 60,000, and then you take 25,000 times 4, that's 100,000. So you're looking at $160,000 before you even enter before you even enter becoming a staff, where you make your money. In residency, you do make money. I mean, you have a salary, but it's not enough to pay back any of these loans by any means. It's basically enough to survive on, to pay rent and food and so forth. So that can be something that it worries people a lot. Like, how am I going to pay back this debt, especially given the job market in medicine these days. So medicine and medical school. So this is kind of describing the medical school experience. The first 2 years are actually very similar to undergrad. A lot of lectures, a lot of seminars, PBL and CBL. So CBL is like case-based learning. PBL is problem-based learning, seminars and tutorials. And then you have sometimes certain medical schools still have anatomy labs and so forth. So that's the first 2 years. It's very similar to kind of an undergraduate a couple years of experience. And then afterwards, you go into third and fourth year. So the first 2 years are called clerkship or pre-clerkship, and then in preparation for clerkship. And clerkship is your third and fourth year, and they're called clinical rotations. And basically, the clinical rotations are, I like to describe it with this statement: is you think of co-op. So whoever's in fourth year, third year, who's done co-op or is thinking of doing co-op, you go out, you work for a company, you get some money. It's kind of a work and learning experience at the same time. So that's what the clerkship is, except you make no money and you have exams. So imagine your worst nightmare coming into life. Like, you have to write an exam after you finish. And you're working 9 to 5, so it's not like you can just go home and study. You have to be there from, or 8 to 5 or whatever it is. You have the same on-call kind of responsibilities as well. I mean, obviously with much more supervision and a lot less responsibility, but you still have that kind of scheduling. So you have to find the time on your own to study for an exam at the end. So that's third and fourth year. And then during your fourth year of medical school, you apply for residency training programs. So residency, which I'm doing now, is kind of exactly like co-op. This time you make money, so it's better in that sense. And there's I shouldn't say there are no exams, there's much fewer exams, and they're not called exams, they're more like assessments. So that's what residency training is like. And fourth year, you apply to that. So you have to kind of decide on what specialty you want to pursue, what kind of medicine you want to practice, and you apply. Just like you apply to medical school, you apply for residency programs. And then there's a match process that occurs. And I mentioned the residency training program lengths already. So I titled this slide Captain Obvious Statements because kind of a lot of these points are known to you already, and I don't know why I'm making them, but just kind of reiterating the point that engineering is hard. A lot of my engineering knowledge is escaping me now. I'm getting old, so But I do remember that it was a hard journey. It was very difficult, especially second, third, and fourth year. I found very difficult. And medical schools require good grades. I mean, that's not going to change. I made this statement last year, and it's kind of the same, kind of reiterating the point. And it's getting more and more competitive every year. Like, I don't know if I was to still apply, I don't know if I would get in. And a lot of people say that nowadays. And overall, the last thing is probably not as obvious, but overall medical schools really don't care that you do engineering or any other undergrad for that matter. And that's something that when I started engineering, I kind of held on to for the first little while. I was like, oh please, I'm an engineer, give me some leeway, but it's not the case. It's very difficult for them to assess a program, let alone just individual courses. So they have over 2,000 to 3,000 people applying. Everyone's taking 10 or more courses. So if you do the math, that's like over 10,000 courses. There's just no way they can evaluate how rigorous a program is, even though engineering is known to be very tough and have a large course load and responsibilities and demands. But it's just to be kind of fair to everyone, they have to make sure it's kind of level playing field. So that's kind of an unfortunate, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's kind of the unfortunate circumstances we live in today. So is there some hope? Not really. No, this is a joke. So engineering does make you cool. I remember when I started medical school, when I would meet a lot of my classmates, and the first thing you would talk to them about is like, where are you from? Where did you do your undergrad? What you did your undergrad in? And there was only like 11 engineers in my class out of like 250, so I was one of the few. And people were like, oh wow, you did engineering, that's really cool. Like, why'd you? And then they would start a conversation like, why did you make a change, or like and things like that, and what you do in engineering and so forth. And so it started a conversation, and people remember that about you, and it does make you stand out to some degree. It also helps you kind of shape your work ethic and just overall like how you approach problems. You're very methodical when you're an engineer. You want to break things down into smaller parts and kind of solve that part and then work your way around it. And again, you're generally you're hard workers because you just have to. You just kind of, when you get thrown into university, you get all this coursework, all these assignments and exams and so forth. So you're used to working hard, or used to being kind of having that workload. And you can also do some really neat and innovative things in research if that's what you're into. And especially you guys are in electrical and biomedical engineering as well as chem and bioengineering, have a great opportunity in research and innovation. And nowadays, I mean, when I first started at Mac, it was, the engineering, the biomedical and bioengineering program were fairly new. They were maybe a couple years old or 3 years old. Now they've been kind of here for about 10 or more years. I would say almost close to 15 now. And the field is continuing to grow, continuing to come up with new innovations, new industries. Like there's things that, companies that exist now that didn't exist when I finished undergrad and didn't exist when I started undergrad. So I mean, this is the new kind of hot topic, especially in the States. It's very big. So that's something, some hope that you guys can have. I mean, if you really like research, or you really like innovation, and you really like to be on the forefront of science and technology, I mean, you can't ask to be in a better field than biomed and bioengineering. And some good news. So you are very, at least I think you're very, and I'm biased obviously. I did Electrical and Biomedical. I'm not gonna say, oh, I wasn't marketable, but I think you guys are marketable to the workforce. I remember going out and people nowadays are looking for kind of people who they don't need to train as often, and people that can just enter into the workforce and do the job. And you guys can do that because you have, if you're in elect and biomed, you have the elect background and you have the biomed background. If you're in chem and bioengineering, you have the chemical background and the bioengineering background. So you really have the best of both worlds. And I think that makes you very marketable. So this next statement, I have no idea anymore because I haven't looked for a job in like so long, but I think the job market is fairly good out there. You gotta ask your friends that are in co-op here. You gotta figure out if this is still true. But from my understanding, the job market is better. I actually graduated in a year. I'm not sure if you guys remember, 2008 and 2009 were kind of the year where the stock market was really poor, and jobs were really hard to come by. People were actually losing their jobs, and companies were not looking to hire. And that's why it took me more than 6 months to find a placement. I was a bit picky. I really wanted to something related to biomedical engineering, but as I got less picky, it was still very difficult. I think I only had 2 interviews, and luckily I got one of the jobs. So I mean, it worked out, and that was I think it's much better than it was then. But I'm not exactly sure. Something to look into. And engineering generally after obviously you're done your undergrad, has a good lifestyle. You work usually 9 to 5. Maybe some overtime, but usually you're not working weekends, usually you're not working overnights. I mean, sometimes, yeah, you'll have to do overtime, you'll have to do weekends and so forth, but on the whole, you don't have to do that, versus medicine where that cannot happen, especially early on in your training, that's nonstop. But in engineering, you don't really have to deal with that. And I know that from my own experience, and also I have a lot of family. I have my sister's in chemical engineering, my brother-in-law is a mechanical engineer, my father's an electrical engineer, so I have a lot of family in engineering, and I know how often they're working, and they don't work they work often, but they don't do that much overtime compared to medicine. So just to go over some brief and general medical school requirements. I do apologize, this is very skeleton-like. This wasn't meant to be a talk about the requirements for medical school. It's mostly kind of an overview of my experiences. But kind of the general requirements, and I encourage you to go look this up online. For Ontario, there is a centralized application system called OMSAS. It's just like how you apply to university, it's similar, centralized system. So they have all the requirements nicely laid out in a PDF for you, so I definitely encourage you to look that up. But most require a 3-year undergrad to at least 3 years to be completed, so you can apply in your 3rd year and beyond. And then most also have a minimum GPA and MCAT requirement. I don't remember what these are anymore. My knowledge is fairly outdated with this. But most schools actually have a minimum, at least a bare minimum. So if you don't meet that minimum, they just throw your application out anyways. And then other schools, depending on what school it is, I know the most about UofT because I go there. But for their GPA requirement, it's basically the higher the better. So obviously, if you have their minimum, I think is 3.6, and I think it's been 3.6 for quite some time. So if you have 3.6, you meet their cutoff. So they'll look at your application. But then if you have a 3.6, you're probably, I shouldn't say you're not going to get in. It's very difficult to get in with that GPA just because there's thousands of applicants that have 3.8, 3.9, 4.0, and literally thousands of applicants that have that GPA. And the same thing goes for MCAT. There's usually a bare minimum. You have to have this amount to get your application to the next stage, and then usually they, depending on, again, what school it is, some schools just have a bare minimum and that's it. Once you get through that, that's all they care about. And other schools sometimes require very high minimums for their MCAT requirement. And the MCAT's changed since I wrote it, so I have very little knowledge on that, so I do apologize. And also a lot of schools, I think all schools have some sort of non-academic requirements, whether it be essays, CV or resume, or reference letters. So every school has this requirement and kind of have to put together a package. And most have prerequisites. And I think the most stringent prerequisites are you have to have like a year of biology, a year of chemistry, a year of the physics, a year of social science, which means a year being 2 courses. But most schools actually are very lenient. They don't have this many requirements. That's kind of the strictest requirements I'm giving you. Some schools don't require anything. Some schools have very few requirements. So again, I encourage you to look this up because every school is different, especially in Ontario. Every school has their own requirements for coursework, for GPA, for MCAT. So it's really hard to keep up to date with all these things. I used to be up to date when I was applying, but not anymore, unfortunately. Okay, so this is one of my last slides. So this is my advice. Which is actually not worth anything, really, because you could take it, you could leave it. Really, just my opinion and kind of my experiences. First, it's really decide if this is something you want to do. And when I mean this being medicine, but it could be anything. If you're thinking of diverting from the engineering route, going either into medicine, going into doing your MBA, doing research work or a PhD or something else, or going into a completely different field altogether. Really, obviously I'm giving my perspective from medicine, is really decide if that's what you want to do. It's not easy to know that because obviously you're not immersed in it yet. But really think about it, really decide, because even just applying to medical school and doing the MCAT and making sure your marks are up to par is not easy because you have to work hard at it, and it's a long process in and of itself. To me, in my opinion, yeah, it is worth it in the end. I wouldn't stand here and be here today if I said, oh man, medicine's not worth it, I want to get out. I would have probably left already. But really, I have questioned it in the past, and I never thought I would. When I was at your stage in training, I really just wanted, like I mentioned, I just wanted to get into medical school. I really just wanted to get into medical school. And then when I got in, I was so happy and went through it. And at first, it was great. But then you get yourself immersed in it, and you face the long hours, the stressful working environments, and honestly, and I feel this is also a very big similarity to engineering. Engineering was one of the things, and I hated this about engineering. I always never felt smart in engineering. I always felt like an idiot every time I was in a class in engineering. And medicine is very similar. You always feel like you don't know anything, especially when you're surrounded by such smart individuals. You're just like, how does this guy know this? How do they know that? And no matter how hard you work, you always feel that you're not up to par. And I felt the same thing. I don't know. I felt the same way about engineering. I never felt good about it, and that's some similarity. And that can be very stressful. But in the end, the benefits of medicine to me outweighed all those things. And it's a lot of the times when I have those, I shouldn't say regrets, but I have those thoughts, it's really because I'm really tired. I've been working a lot of hours and so forth, and when I get some time off, I kind of, simmer down and kind of relax and get back motivated again. Second statement, obviously, I mean, maybe not for some of you, maybe not be too late to change your undergrad, but generally it's probably a little too late for those in third and fourth year to change their undergrad. But you know what? You're in a great program. I want to reiterate that. Make the best of what you can, and be optimistic and realistic about your chances. Obviously, if you have a 2.1 GPA, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get it. It's just not possible, right, to get into medical school. But at the same time, just be a bit realistic about your chances. Like if you have a 3.6 or 3.7 GPA, 3.8, obviously, you're getting much more competitive. And you know what? You should try. You should definitely try and organize your application. Obviously, the weaker your GPA is, the stronger your other aspects of your application have to be. So definitely get in touch with those who have been through the process, get their advice on what makes a good application and what things you should focus on and how you should improve your overall, most likely non-academic requirements. And so forth. So definitely be optimistic but realistic about your chances. And don't settle. There's so many things out there. Like you guys are second and third year of undergrad. I mean, you could definitely pursue engineering if that's what you want to do. If that's your passion, definitely go with it. If you want to do something in research, definitely go with it. You have your training is very flexible. As I mentioned, you guys are kind of you're in a great position. You have that engineering background, you have that science background. You can really combine it and do some really cool things. You can pursue other opportunities. A lot of my friends pursued, like I said, I have friends that did PhDs. I had friends that went in to do their MBAs and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunities available. Just because you're in engineering doesn't mean, just because you're in certain undergrad path doesn't mean you have to stick with that path and complete it and just do that for the rest of your life. If you're not happy, there's always other avenues. But the caveat to that is, do your research. Don't make just a blind decision and give up everything and then, make a 180 or whatever it is. Do your research, plan accordingly, and things will work out. I promise you that. So that's actually my presentation. I tried to keep it short, mostly because I like answering questions. I'm sure many of you have questions and or comments and so forth. So I'm happy to answer any of your questions, and thank you.
So say I were to apply in fourth year to med school, are they just going to look at the GPA from the fourth year alone or all throughout your university?
It depends on the schools.
Okay.
I think for most schools, so I know McMaster, I think it's still like this. Again, you got to check the requirements for every single school, unfortunately. But I think McMaster is still like this, where they take all your marks up until that point. Obviously, they can't include the year you're in because you haven't finished it. UofT, from my understanding, and I still think they do this, is they drop your low, and this is why I think I got into UofT, is because they drop my lowest 6 courses. If you're in 4th year, they'll drop your lowest 6. If you're in your sorry?
It's 8 for 4 years?
8 for 4 years, and if you're
6
finished
for
3,
3.
6 for 3 years. So I finished 4 years, so they dropped my lowest 8 courses, which really helped my GPA. Made me in the competitive range. It still didn't make my GPA super, like I'll be honest, my GPA was 3.62, my cumulative GPA. And then when I dropped my lowest 8, it was 3.82. So it got me in the 3.8 range, and back then 3.8 was enough to be pretty competitive. I don't know what it is now, but, and I think every other schools like Queen's and Western, they look at your final 2 years, or your most recent 2 years. And other schools, again, out of province, it really depends, so I would definitely encourage you to look those up. So yeah, if you did bad in 1 year, but your other years are great, you still have an awesome chance. There's a lot of people in my class, even not from engineering, that had that situation. It's just, sometimes it's only one course, really, that screws you over, and then, you know, you can get certain schools that don't look at that year, for example.
Thank you.
What experiences inspire the best doctor in you? So like,
Oh, I feel like I'm in an interview. What experiences? You mean my undergrad, from my undergrad?
yeah, from your undergrad, from your research, like what makes you the best doctor you can be? Like from your background.
I found that I did a lot of, I would say from my undergrad, I did a lot of volunteer work at MUMC here at the Children's Hospital. And I found that obviously working with sick children and volunteering, there's only so much you can do, obviously, but even simple things like spending time with them. We used to play games a lot of times, board games and so forth. And you know, that kind of brightened their day, gave them something to do, and you know, they're in a pretty rough situation, you know, they're in hospital for whatever condition they're coming in with. And I found that that kind of instilled a bit of empathy and kind of compassion in my character, and that in turn it reminds me from when I go through medicine. I've been through medicine, and during the hard times, you kind of have to check yourself. You kind of have to take a step back and be like, why am I doing this? And kind of remembering those experiences. I mean, obviously that was a while back, but even my experiences throughout medical school and research kind of instill that compassion and empathy. And you just remind yourself this is why you're doing it. That's one aspect. And the other thing I would say is just the work ethic that engineering instilled in me. The one thing I would say, I shouldn't say I enjoyed, but I am very appreciative of the engineering program at McMaster that they did to me, was they made me a very hard worker, and that was just mostly to survive. But it really did, it really helped me, because I get into medical school, and really medical school wasn't very difficult. I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of volume of information, but the actual, like, it's all pass-fail. It wasn't it wasn't very high stress. I mean, yeah, there was exams and so forth, but they were just testing your knowledge to make sure you're competent. Versus in engineering, I felt they were trying to flail me, really, right? But anyway, this is a different topic. But yeah, so I'm really appreciative of the fact that because of my undergraduate experiences, because I was able to work so hard in engineering just to survive, I felt that translated over not only to medical school, but even in my residency training and work training. Everything seems a little bit more tolerable. So that's how I would answer that question. Okay.
What other things were you doing in your undergrad that sort of helped you get an edge?
I did a lot. So I mean, I did volunteer work at MUMC. I was involved in some student groups. I was involved with Beams, actually. I wasn't the president, I was a VP, but I was very involved in Beams at the time. Yeah, I actually liked Beams. Was a fun time because we got to organize all these events and like industry. I think you still have it, like the industry night. We have the graduate school night and meet the professors nights and everything. And I was also involved in other student groups on campus. I did volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity. I did a bunch of other stuff that I actually can't remember right now, but like, to be honest, and I get asked this question a lot, in terms of what experiences you need to get into medical school, or what experiences are good that look good on a resume, or that look good on a CV, or look good on a medical school application. And really, it's what you learn from the experience that matters more than the experience itself. So like you could, like volunteering at the hospital doesn't mean anything if you don't take anything away from that, right? Because that's a common thing that undergrads like to do is volunteer at a hospital because it shows their commitment to healthcare or whatever. But and I had the same mentality, but really it was my ability to showcase what I learned from my volunteer experience at the hospital and how I was able to translate that to how that would make me into a better doctor or how that would make me into a better medical student. And a lot of people get caught up in, oh, I need to do this to make my resume look good, or I need to do this. But really, in the end, it matters about what skills you gain or how you hone those skills. So for me, for example, Beams, I was able to kind of showcase my organizational skills, my leadership skills, because I was able to help organize events and get in contact with the various people from the industry or from the academic arena and show that skill. And for volunteering, I would show, my ability to communicate with patients and their loved ones and so forth. So kind of that kind of things. Those are the kind of skills they're looking for. More so is they don't have a checklist. It's like, okay, does this guy do volunteering in the hospital? Does this guy do this volunteering? It doesn't really matter what you do.
They want to see like leadership, compassion.
There's
What about like did you volunteer in like an academic setting?
Yeah, so I did a bit of tutoring work. I was involved in a bit of tutoring work. I did a bit of I can't even remember. I was trying to remember so long ago when I applied. What else did I do? I did it. I did do some academic stuff. I just can't remember off the top of my head what it was. But yeah, I was involved. And that actually looks good on, I guess, a CV or resume because they want to see that you're a lifelong learner, that you're able to be involved in academics outside of the classroom, for example. Because a lot of medicine involves teaching and being that type of individual that's always engaged in learning and research. Another way academic pursuit could be research, as I mentioned. I was also heavily involved in research, at least after I graduated. But that's also an area that I was involved in, both in undergrad. My capstone project was also something I talked about in interviews as well. So it's something that, like I said, what you take away from the experience is much more important than what the actual experience was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So things like trauma and oncology, are those subspecialties or are those right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So trauma is, it depends. So trauma, like being a trauma surgeon, you would have to do general surgery and then you subspecialize in trauma. Oncology, depends what kind of oncology you do. If you're talking about medical oncology, you do internal medicine and you can subspecialize as an oncologist. If you want to do surgical oncology, you do surgery and then you subspecialize in surgical oncology within that field.
So is that like resecting tumors or something like that?
Sorry, yeah, so that would be like resecting tumor, so that would be a surgeon. It would be a surgical oncologist. And again, it depends what field, like it's, like for example, certain tumors, I mean, you don't need to do subspecialists, like for example, like a thyroid tumor, you don't need to necessarily do subspecialty to remove the whole thyroid gland. Just a regular ENT surgeon can do that, but then certain weird and wonderful head and neck tumors, they need to do further subspecialty within ENT, which would be like some like surgical oncology of the head and neck, and they do further training. And I'm not exactly sure how long that is. Usually, I would assume 1 to 2 years on top of their surgical training. Those are kind of subspecialties, and I mean, generally speaking, like there's surgery and then there's medicine, and then obviously there's pediatrics and psychiatry, and everything has their subspecialties as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So why did you choose to go through the engineering path? Because you said that you found it a lot more oppressive than med school, I guess. So did you go into the engineering program knowing that you wanted to go to med school, or was it kind of just to keep your options open?
Is a little bit of both, I would say. So when I as any 18-year-old coming into university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I kind of liked science, kind of liked math, kind of liked physics. I'm like, and I also like bio. So I was like, this biomedical engineering program kind of meets all those, gives me great job options afterwards if I decide to just do engineering. And they also, they advertise the program so nicely here. They have a great marketing team, engineering marketing team. Like, we meet the medical school requirements, MCAT requirements, and everything, right? So I was like, oh, this is beautiful. Let me do this, right? Mm-hmm. And then and I did it, and I'm like, oh man, this is really tough. But to be honest, though, it was a great program. Overall, it was a good program. like other than the stressful times, it was still fun. I made a lot of good friends and good experiences here. Early on in my training, early on in engineering, I didn't know if I really wanted to do medicine right away. I think it was in second year, near the end or middle of second year, and then third year where I really wanted to do medicine, especially after doing anatomy and physiology. I really wanted to do medicine after that. But even in second year early on, I was like, I don't know if I like this so much. And then third year just kind of clinched it for me. So that was the reason I kind of stuck with engineering at first, yeah.
So just asking out of curiosity, because I'm also in Electrical and Biomed, what courses did you struggle with that you had to drop? Like, did you do well in anatomy or? Like,
I did because I really liked it. I really did enjoy anatomy and physiology, and that's probably the reason I ended up doing medical school. Because like if you ask like any of my classmates, they would be like, I would be in the lab for like I don't know who's doing anatomy or has done anatomy, but you know you go to the anatomy lab and you're practicing for the BioEng, and I would be there overnight, or I'd be there like late hours in the night. My clothes would smell formaldehyde. I was a really big nerd, but yeah. So I enjoyed anatomy physiology. I actually struggled with the engineering courses more so, especially the elect courses. I think the programming courses were my weakest ones. Some of the math courses I did okay in. I'm trying to think what other courses I did. In the third year I found was a bit easier, a little bit, I enjoyed it more, at least. I found that actually the comp eng courses, like the microprocessors and the logic courses, I actually enjoyed those courses for some reason more than my elect courses. So I think it's individual based. Like I think my first year I dropped programming, and I didn't in the summer. I couldn't drop, so I did technically drop second year programming, but I had to do it again, but I just didn't do it until my fourth year. Just because I was like, I don't want to do programming. And the programming courses are hard here, like I found them very difficult. Not that I just couldn't program, I found the exams were very difficult. But anyways, that's just my story. I think as long as you take 10 courses, it doesn't matter if you drop courses. For most schools, it won't matter, as long as you have a full course load being 10 courses throughout the year, so 5 in first semester, 5 in second. And the only issue is, unfortunately for engineering, I don't think any of the courses are offered in the summer anyways, right? So you kind of have to do them eventually. So. Yeah, back there.
Amongst your peers in med school, have you noticed that you had a leg up in any areas like problem solving or applying yourself or technical knowledge from your research positions?
Sometimes, like I think so there are some things in medicine that are you still have to kind of come back to the basic kind of science. So I would say certain things that involve physics. So there are like when you're learning about like cardio-res physiology, especially, you learn there's still physics involved in that, compliance, resistance. Everything's Ohm's law. So if you know Ohm's law, like V equals IR, you kind of can think through those problems. So in that sense, it was easier for me to grasp those concepts, I would say. But in the end, I mean, those guys everyone in medical school is already at a pretty high achieving level that they don't struggle that hard with it. I would say from a work ethic point of view, I would personally say I probably work a bit harder, generally speaking. I don't know if that's just my character, that's engineering, or a combination of the two. But I found that as well. And sometimes also another thing I would say in imaging, you don't learn a lot about imaging in medical school. You kind of just look at images like X-rays and CT scans and so forth. But sometimes when you talk about certain imaging modalities, sometimes I kind of recall my engineering background and so that kind of helps. But overall, it's more of the work ethic, I would say. Yeah.
So, with all the long nights and the amount of stress and mental strain it places on your body, like, I'm just gonna be flat out, I wanna say, like, what type of toll do you think it took on you, like, physically and mentally?
Engineering or medicine?
Well, both. Like, moving forward, like, how do you think that affected you?
That's a good question. Well, engineering was, it was more of a mental toll. It wasn't. And you know what, the good thing about being an undergrad, you have summers off, right? So you have those 4 months, you can kind of recharge, relax as much as, even if you're working, it's not that stressful working compared to being in like the exam mode or the project or assignment mode or whatever. So I found that was definitely helpful. Every time when I started feeling burnt out from engineering, in undergrad. I realized that, it's almost the end of the semester, it's almost the end of the year, and I have a bit of a break coming up in mental health. And those always actually did coincide when and I think that's why they planned a year like that. I had 2 weeks off in December, kind of recharged from that. From January until April, you have after April's done, you have 4 months off, which is amazing. So I kind of recharged from that and went forward that way. And then after engineering, when I finished, I was in the workforce, I was doing my engineering related or research work. I didn't find it wasn't as burdensome. I had my weekends free, I had my time off and so forth. So that was a time period in my life I wasn't as stressed, I guess. Stressed in a different way. I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do, and that was stressful. But then in medical school, the first 2 years aren't stressful. I would say they're not really stressful at all. It's just exams and whatever. It's not that big of a deal. You still get your summers off, which are like 3 months, and it's great. It's third and fourth year that were probably in medical school the most stressful, just because you're in a new environment. It's kind of like I mentioned, it's like co-op except you have exams and no salary, and so the fact of the matter is you're in a hospital setting where most people haven't worked in that setting before. They don't know how a hospital works. They don't know how they can be a good member of the team. And as a medical student, especially when you're starting off in third year, you're kind of like the bottom of the rung. There's residents, there's fellows, there's staff physicians, and they're all supervising you. So I found that year, those 2 years are very difficult, and then you're applying for residency in your fourth year, and that's also a stressful time. I think it does take your toll, but again, you have breaks, right? Like in third year, not so much, but in fourth year, I had those breaks and kind of recharge. I always like to take a step back. Like right now I'm on vacation, I was starting to feel burnt out from residency now. I have a week off, so I'm just gonna not do anything for a week, and then I'm gonna get back to my residency program. So I think it's important to take that time off and kind of recharge, spend time with family, friends, and kind of catch up on that. But you're right, and a lot of people don't know this, but the suicide rate amongst physicians is fairly high. And mental health illness amongst physicians is fairly high for those very reasons. It's stressful. And then on top of that, if you're already predisposed to having those conditions or having that, it can make it worse, exacerbated. And unfortunately, the mentality in the field is, you don't talk about it. No one really talks about it because you're the doctor, right? You're not supposed to get sick in that way, or you're not supposed to be afflicted by this. You're supposed to be kind of immune to it, but that's not necessarily the case. We're all human, right? Unfortunately, I have a great support system, great family and friends. I have a wife that's very supportive as well, and so I kind of go back to that and just try to remind myself why I'm in the field and try to make the best of it. So you had a question?
Yeah, I did. So something I really appreciate about engineering is how creative it is.
Yeah.
So any industry that I would go into, or like any of us would go into, we'd be able to apply that creativity. In what ways have you applied your engineering in medical school, in residency, or in what ways you plan to incorporate?
Like creativity?
Yeah, or like engineering specifically.
I think that on a daily basis, really, as a physician, at least in my field, I can't really speak to other fields just because I'm not as immersed in them. But medicine's always about breaking a problem down into smaller kind of, especially internal medicine, because a lot of our patients have multiple issues, multiple complex issues going on that sometimes they can play a role and they can intertwine and so forth. But maybe that's why I like internal medicine so much, and that's why I'm in the field. Is I like to break it down into problem by problem, kind of approach this problem. This patient has this issue 1, I'm going to address this way, and this is how I'm going to treat them. This is issue number 2, I'm going to address, and that's how engineering is, right? You take this huge problem, like whatever it may be, and then you break it down into smaller components, right? And then you work those components together to solve the bigger issue. I find that in general, medicine is like that. You try not to, it's very organized and very methodical in that way. You don't just go to a patient and be like, listen to their story and be like, oh, you have this, let me just do it. You have to take everything into context and you have to really consider the whole situation because you could miss something. And when we miss things, it can be very devastating. So you have to be careful in that regard. And I feel that engineering become, like I mentioned, very detail-oriented, very methodical. And you have a step-by-step approach, and I feel that I apply that now, and I definitely will be able to apply that more in the future as well. And I think that's what I enjoy about it.
So far, have you seen any opportunities to develop any devices or procedures that would?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely get involved in research and developing if that's something you think, especially if you're in medicine. You just have to find the right avenues and the right people to work with. I personally, I don't know if that's something I want to do necessarily or not. I'm still trying to get used to, I guess I'm still pretty early in my medical training that I just want to become a good physician before I kind of make that jump into research or developing devices and so forth. But definitely there are opportunities available, even for non-clinicians or non-physicians to be involved in research in those devices. In device development or robotics or imaging, there's so much out there. I mean, it's crazy. And I didn't realize that until after, I shouldn't say after I finished, because I kind of realized it. I did a research project in third year at University of Toronto during one of their summer research programs, and I realized how much the vast majority or vast opportunities there are available in biomedical, electrical and biomedical, and chemical and bioengineering. There's just so much available, and I encourage you, if you're interested in that, definitely look up the opportunities. One of the good schools is the IBBME. It's through UofT. It's the IBBME, so Institute of Bioengineering and Biomaterials, Biomaterials and Biomedical Engineering, and they have a lot of opportunities available. So. But if, as a resident, you want to get involved, you can. You just have to find. It's all like self-directed, right? You have to find the supervisor. You have to set meetings up. And a lot of times, as a resident, I don't have time to do all that. I just barely have time to eat and sleep sometimes. So, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
So a lot of the people I know that have gotten into med school have said that they found the interview portion of the application the hardest. What's your experience with it? Is it just kind of like a job interview, or?
I found it more like a job interview, actually.
Okay.
So I only interviewed at UofT. So, and back when I interviewed, it was more of just a panel interview, 2 people asking you very similar questions that they asked in a job interview. Nowadays, I think it's not like that anymore. A lot of it's MMI or multiple mini interviews, which can be very stressful for people, or can be very daunting. But personally, from my personal experience, I actually found the application process very arduous, just because you have to contact referees, you have to give them the appropriate material, you have to put together a good CV, you have to go through like everything, like make sure with like a fine-tooth comb, right? Because it's something you really want, and something you really want to put effort and time into it. Like, so I found that most people that I talked to actually, whether they're in engineering or not, would find just the application process very, just demanding. It's just a lot to do. And if you're not spending a lot of time in your application process, you're either really smart and you're gonna get in anyways, or you're not doing it right. So that's what I found.
So you said you were doing research engineering for the 3 years after your undergrad?
Yeah.
What do you think the pros and cons are between doing research-based engineering and doing industry-based engineering?
Yeah, I don't think there's a pro or a con either way. I think, for me, I just found a job in research that was related to biomedical engineering, and especially at that time, there weren't as many companies in biomedical engineering, and if there were, they weren't hiring.
Mm-hmm.
I think had I had the opportunity to go into industry, I probably would have at least tried it, right? And I think it's good to have the flavor, do a bit of both if you can. And I think, like I said, I don't think there's a benefit either way. I think in research you get a little bit more immersed to kind of the academic environment, and you may see the politics a bit more of kind of the hierarchy involved and what it takes to complete a research project. I was in the sense that I wasn't actually ever a principal or investigator myself in projects. I was mostly involved as a support staff for graduate students that were doing projects. And so it wasn't like I had my own projects, but it was more like I was involved in 4 or 5 different other projects, as opposed to this is my project. I have to see it from from the idea to completion, right? Which can be in and of itself very stressful. So. You kind of get exposed to that. Whereas in industry, I feel that it's good to build. It's also good to build those skills, and I think those skills are very applicable to not just engineering related work, but anything really. If you want to go into medicine, you can definitely apply those skills in medicine and work in general. Because in industry, you're working with other individuals. You're collaborating. You're communicating. You're also you have to be very organized and hitting your deadlines and so forth. So I find that those experiences are also very useful. So I don't think there's like a right thing to do either way.
In retrospect, what would you change about your journey?
About my journey?
Yeah.
Probably nothing, because it ended up working out in the end. I don't know what would happen if I had gone down another path or made a change here or there. Like I always kind of think, especially when I finished undergrad but didn't get into medical school right away, I always thought maybe if I had made this change I would have gotten in, or maybe if I had done this differently I would have gotten in. But really I don't know what would have happened if I took that path, right? So in retrospect, and this is why I like giving this talk, is kind of gives my perspective. And in the end, I mean, I shouldn't call them regrets necessarily, but I have second thoughts of things. But I'm glad that I went through this journey and this process. I mean, sure, I finished a bit later than everyone else, but really, who cares? Like, no one's gonna care if I finish 3 years later, 10 years later, or if I finished on time, right? There's no timeline to do these things. I have people in my class that are in their, had people in my class because we're finished now, but I had people in my class that were in their 30s, in their mid-30s even. I think our older individual was in his mid-30s, so, he had his MBA and he had worked in an industry and so forth, and he decided he wanted to do medicine, and so that happens, right? So I think I don't really regret anything, and I think that's kind of the message that I wanted to kind of give forth is, you guys are you're still young, most of you are in your early 20s, still in second, third year, still have to finish undergrad. There's just so much ahead of you that you can complete. And I think right now the first step is get through undergrad, find out what you like to do, find out what you want to do, and then work, and then plan ahead, and then work at it like that. Yeah.
So what was your process with writing the MCAT? Because having an engineering background, would you have to allocate more time to studying? Because I know most science students, they just take 4 months off and they write the MCAT.
Yeah, I don't think I took 4 months off to study. I studied a lot, but I think 8 to 10 weeks is sufficient, which is a lot. That's two and a half full months. And that was like everyday studying, kind of 8 to 5, 10 to 6 kind of thing. I would say, to be honest, the MCAT has changed, but from when I wrote it, I didn't have to study as hard for the physics or the chemistry, just because we had those courses, and it's kind of like literally first year level of knowledge for those. And so bio, I guess I had to study a bit more. But not tremendously. I didn't have to dedicate a whole 2 months to just study that. And a lot of the MCAT is not just knowledge based. It's just being able to synthesize information, right? They give you kind of a passage with certain information. You have to obviously have a background knowledge of that topic, of that, I guess, subject area. Like if it's chemistry, you kind of have to know your basic chemistry, but in the end, it really depends on how you synthesize the information from that passage in answering the questions. I studied, like I said, again, 8 to 10 weeks full time. That's a lot. I would say that's the max. I wouldn't study more than that. I know maybe you heard people study. Again, it might have changed and maybe it's different now because I think there's a social sciences component to the MCAT and so forth, so maybe that's different. And maybe people are spending more time on that, but I don't think you need more. And I think most of my friends that were in sciences or health science didn't take more than 2 months full-time studying and kind of just wrote it and got it over with.
When did you write it?
I think I wrote it twice. I wrote it once in second year and once after my 4th year. I got the same score at both times. So back then it was just 3 sections, and now I think it's 4 and it's scored differently. I have no idea how it is now, so unfortunately I can't get that information or help with that.
What was your score?
Sorry?
What was your score?
32. So I don't know what that converts to now. Yeah. It was just a score good enough to kind of meet the requirements of most schools. Well, at least UofT. Yeah.
So what kind of things do you do in the summers of medical school?
So you can there's a lot of options. You can do nothing, so just relax, which I would encourage at least spend part of your summer doing. There's research. A lot of medical students get involved in research just because residency applications are very similar to kind of medical school applications, and they like to. Some residency programs like to see research, and so a lot of people, I would say a good chunk of the class gets involved in some sort of research. Whether it be organized through funding or not is a different story. And then other people travel. And I didn't do a lot of traveling in medical school. I did do some research work. I did get involved in small projects that weren't research related, they were more medical education related. And then I took at least a couple weeks off just to kind of relax and do nothing and kind of recharge. And I think that's very useful because if you're always going to do like work, like you finish medical school or you finish your semester or a year, and then you do work and then you start again, you don't have that time to kind of recharge, right? And I don't need a lot of time. I need like 2 weeks off and I'm good. Like 2 weeks of doing nothing, I'm good. I'm bored and I want to get back to work. So really, I think and that's what I did. But a lot of people do traveling and other things as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had on calls and working and then having to study after you work and working on your weekends.
Yeah.
What do you like doing on the side?
Like what do I like
doing
the
like
most?
that? And you also mentioned that you have a family,
Yeah.
right? And
Well,
so
yeah.
kind of like you have a wife, right?
Yeah.
And so what are some of the sacrifices that you have to make
Oh,
in order
man.
to
So
do this journey?
I mean, generally speaking, I'm just like I like a lot of things. I used to play a lot more sports. I haven't done that in a long time. I regret that, unfortunately, but it's kind of the way my life works out right now. I actually just recently got married last year. So before this talk last year, I think this talk was around the same time in September, and I was about to get married then. So I just got married in November of last year, of 2015, and it's it was good timing because I had finished my rotations and I had a bit of time off, so I did that. And then fourth year, the rest of fourth year wasn't so difficult, so it wasn't so bad for my wife and me. But residency has been fairly difficult just because I'm on call very often, and my work hours aren't so bad. Most days, I think the latest I've ever finished work is 7 or 6:30, which isn't super bad, but that's like on occasion, just once in a while. Most days I work, I would finish by 5, 5:30, 5:45. But then the on-call is the stuff that kind of adds to my schedule, and I mean, to be honest, you kind of just really just man it out, just go through it. Like you just kind of have to go through it. It sucks for the people who, your loved ones. It sucks for my wife. It sucks for my parents because they like to see me too, and it's just difficult to kind of organize my life, and I try my best. I try to take some time off when I do have time to try to go out with people, but it's like I said, I haven't seen my friends in a while either, and luckily I obviously see my wife every day, so that's kind of been my anchor and my support. And to be honest, I'm still trying to learn kind of how to best maneuver because. Especially when you're early on in residency, you put a lot of pressure on yourself. I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to learn as much as possible, and because after this, like right now I'm being supervised, but in 4 or 5 years, no one's going to be watching over my back, making sure I'm doing the right thing, making sure I'm not missing anything, right? And that's what drives me now, right? And so I kind of just man it out, and I'm still learning, kind of navigating through this work-life balance. Some rotate, like certain rotations, certain clinical services are busier than others that have more call. The ones like cardiology, I was just on cardiology a couple of months ago, and now I'm on general medicine, which is more heavy call responsibilities, like every 4th day. Whereas in a couple of months, I'll be on a rotation that's not as heavy, and it'll be like once a week. Or once every 6 days or so. So that's when I'm like, okay, I have a bit more time, I can spend more time with my family. But it's a learning process, even for me. I don't have a great answer, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, you were raising your hand and you put it down. Do you have a question or?
Kinda, yeah. So,
Sure.
To this day, like, I don't know, it just seems like the debt keeps piling on. Like, how do you manage that? Like,
The work or,
well, like financially, like,
sorry?
like the financial debt, I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how do you, like,
I was lucky in the sense that, so after I finished medical school, when I started work, I was living at home, so I didn't have to pay a lot, right? So most of that stuff was going into my savings. And so luckily I used a good chunk of that for my tuition for medical school. And I was also lucky in the sense that when I was an undergrad, my parents paid for most of my undergrad. So I didn't have a lot of debt to begin with in that sense. For people that unfortunately aren't in the same position as me or not lucky enough, unfortunately, that obviously take OSAP. So OSAP's good in the sense they'll cover, I think up to, in medical school it's up to 14,000, I want to say, I'm not exactly sure, 14 to 15,000, which isn't super bad. It's actually decent. I mean, you still have about 10,000 or so to cover yourself, but at the same time, if you qualify for OSAP, you also qualify for the various financial aid that's available through the University of Toronto, specifically through the medical school program. Like if you're in medical, I think that's across the board, any university you go to, any medical school program. As long as you qualify for OSAP, they have you automatically enrolled in their bursary programs, and they usually give you free money, which you use towards your tuition or your OSAP loan or whatever. And I think on average it's about $4,000 or $5,000 a year, which is pretty good. So that covers about 20,000, and so you have about $4,000 or $5,000 to cover. A lot of people in medical school, I would say the vast majority have a line of credit, which is about I think $150,000 to $200,000 line of credit, so they use that. I would say if you were to do that, you'd be very conservative on, or else it just piles up, right? Because I know people using their line of credit to go on vacations and do whatever. But in the end, you have this 200. If you have like your own OSAP debt, which is like from undergrad and medical school, that's like $60,000 to $80,000, and you have this line of credit debt that's now like another $100,000. You're looking at almost $200,000. So you got to be a little bit careful in that sense. Another good thing about OSAP is you only have to pay back $7,000 for a 1 year, for like 8-month term or 10-month term or whatever it is, and then for a full year you have to pay back $10,000. And that goes for undergrads too. I think it's the same for anyone. So I think so it's about $7,400 you have to pay back, and $10,300 or something for a full year. So that actually helps a lot too, because that kind of, if your tuition's $20,000, if you think about it, they give you $15,000. That $5,000 you don't have to pay that, or that even, sorry, it's more, because if you're only paying back 7 years, you're not paying back about $8,000, right? So that helps a lot too. Yeah.
Did you ever consider school in the States?
I did. So the thing, I think the main drawback for me was financial. It's very expensive to go to American medical school as a non-state resident. So it's like 40 to 50,000 American. So right now the dollars are horrible. So at least when I was applying, it was close to par, but now it's in like 75 cents, right? So it's horrible. So it would be like you're paying 25% more to go to. So add like 40, 50,000 and add 25% to that, right? So it could be crazy. So that was my main deterrent. But I would say if you're looking outside of Canada, definitely consider the U.S. U.S. should be like your number one. Don't think about any other school unless you consider U.S. schools first, and then you can think about international schools. Because as an international student, or going to an international school, even as a Canadian, when you're applying for residency, you're considered an international medical graduate, or IMG for short. And IMGs are not in the same pool for residency as Canadian medical graduates. They have their own stream, and you're competing with everyone that's applying internationally from everywhere, regardless of where you were born, or where they were born, whatever. And they have much fewer spots. So for like my program for internal medicine, we had only 10 international spots, and I think they had at least 1,000 people apply for 10 spots. So being an international graduate, it's difficult. And if you don't get a residency, your medical school training is not worth anything. It's not worth the paper that it was printed on, really. If I don't have a residency, I can't do anything. I can't practice independently or anything. So that's the main thing. So you want to definitely be able, if you're medical school abroad or outside of Canada, always keep in mind how, like, first of all, if you want to come back, and if you want to come back, you got to come back for residency, or even after residency, how are you going to do that? So what's the process? What kind of exams you have to write and so forth, and licensing requirements. So that's. But as a medical graduate from the States, you don't face that same, that same obstacle. You're considered a Canadian medical graduate, even though you went to a U.S. school. So you can apply with the Canadians in the Canadian stream.
Could you speak to Canadian graduates from medical school practicing abroad, perhaps in the States?
Oh yeah, one of the great things I find about Canadian training or Canadian medical training is both medical school and especially residency programs are very, very strong, and they're very internationally renowned. So basically, if you get fully licensed in Canada, you're with some exceptions, there are different specialties that are that have training requirements that don't meet certain requirements in the States, but for the most part, at least for me, coming from internal medicine, I can work anywhere. As long as I'm fully licensed here, I can pretty much work anywhere. Whether I have to meet their requirements, write their exams and whatever, but aside from that, I can work in the States. If I want to work abroad, I can also do that. And it's a very well recognized. Many people around the world, or a lot of people from Canada work around the world for that very reason. Just because the training is it's high quality training that we get here. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you said you were you're a resident, right, at one of the hospitals. So throughout your time at the hospital, do you have any interesting experiences or stories?
Oh, I have a bunch. Even more so from medical school, I guess, than from, because internal medicine, I mean, you see your fair share of interesting, I guess, patient encounters, but I would say the people that have the coolest stories are emerge docs, because they just see whatever walks in through the door, and psychiatrists. Cause some of the people they face, they're really actually really interesting, really funny stories too. I don't know, I can't really divulge just because of patient confidentiality of certain stories, but you do see people who are actively psychotic. In my medical school training, I did see people who are actively psychotic, actively thinking people are after them, and I had one patient who put his hand through a window at a Tim Hortons and was in the emergency room and had to get stitches, and then afterwards he was just rambling on and made no sense whatsoever. I don't know what he was saying, and so you see a lot of that on psychiatry more so than other specialties. But in internal medicine, we get a lot of, because we see a lot of older patients. You also see a lot of patients who are delirious, so they don't always make sense. And I work at St. Mike's, which is a downtown teaching hospital, and it's in the inner city, so there's a lot of IV drug users and a lot of patients who are, I guess, homeless and not in the best financial situation or best social situation. And so you'll see a lot of patients that are coming in with medical, active medical issues, and they just want to leave, just want to go home. And I'm like, no, you could die if you leave, and they don't care. You kind of just leave. So you kind of deal with stuff like that. So those are kind of without divulging too much information, some of the things I've seen. Any other questions? Sure.
So what's the next step from here? Where's the finish line?
I think I guess right now it's just get through residency. So residency in my program is a graded responsibility. So first year I'm a junior resident, and then second year I become senior resident. And as a senior resident, so when I'm on call as a junior resident in internal medicine on the general medicine unit, I covered my ward patients or my team's patients, which is about anywhere from 15 to 25 patients that are admitted to hospital. And then I also we get new admissions from the emergency department. So the senior resident actually triages them, makes sure they're stable, initiates any treatment right then and there, and then he'll call one of the junior residents to do the actual admission, get the whole story and admit them to hospital. So that's what I do as a junior resident, and then next year I'll be in the senior role, and so when I'm on call, I'll be mostly in the emergency department, getting the new consults from the emergency department where the emerge feels like they need to be admitted to hospital, and so we go see the patients, evaluate them quickly, make sure they're stable, determine if they need a hospital admission, and then triage them appropriately and call our junior colleagues for the admission. So that's the next step, and then hopefully as I go on in my training, figure out what I want to subspecialize in, and then apply. And I applied to medical school and residency, I have to apply again for a subspecialty, so that's not too long away either, it's only a couple years away, so I have to do that. So that's kind of my next steps, and then work it from there.
And which specialty?
So I'm in internal medicine right now, so there's a lot of subspecialties available for me. I'm thinking respirology, so lung specialist right now, so we'll see. My mind might change. And I'm still available if someone wants to come up and chat. I'll be happy to stick around for 15-20 minutes. Okay?